Welcome everyone to today's webinar, which is a day in the life of an EIA professional. Today we're joined by Dr. Jemma Lonsdale, who's a principal environmental consultant at Haskinen. With over 14 years of experience in the coastal and marine sector, she's worked across ports and shipping, offshore renewables, and aggregate extraction industries. Jemma specialises in environmental impact assessment, or EIA, and has extensive expertise in licensing and consenting. As always, there will be the chance for questions at the end of the presentation, so please do submit these in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen at any point during the presentation. I'll then be able to ask these on your behalf later. So thanks everyone for logging in, and I will now hand over to Jemma.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar today. As Amy says, I'm classed as an EIA professional. My background has been in marine, but that's slightly changing, as I will talk you through later on. So this is just to basically give you a little bit of insight into my experience and kind of my route through to kind of where I am now, and a little bit of advice. As EIA professionals is quite a broad topic and subject. So not all of it might not be relevant, but hopefully you'll take something away today that will be helpful and useful. So what today we'll cover is, firstly, because this is kind of an open webinar, I will briefly touch on what is an EIA. I will then move on to kind of my route to my current role, what my current role entails, some of the projects I work on and kind of how they link to sustainability, and advice for people either wanting to get into the EIA practice or already there, but maybe kind of early careers. First of all, what is an EIA? As Amy mentioned in the introduction, it stands for Environmental Impact Assessment, but it is often abbreviated to EIA because it is so long. So the EIA is a process which is undertaken to consider the potential impacts a proposed development may have on the environment. It is very similar to a risk assessment where you are thinking about what could happen and the severity of what could happen. But whilst the process is similar, obviously the criteria and the terms we use are slightly different, which I will come on to. An EIA is carried out by a developer. Now, a developer in this sense could be the traditional sense. So it could be someone wanting to build an offshore wind farm, or it could be a port developer wanting to kind of expand their port. Or it could also be a public body. So kind of an easy one is like the Environment Agency. If they're wanting to build new flood defences or a new kind of managed realignment site, they would be the ones who would need to kind of carry out an environmental impact assessment. Often, though, these developers get a consultancy, such as Haskinen, to carry out the EIAs on their behalf. Now, because it's there to kind of predict what might happen and give the decision makers kind of information, evidence on which to base their decision, it's carried out relatively early on in the process. So it's there to kind of inform consent and planning permission decisions. So it will normally sit alongside kind of any planning application form you have. And the main driver for carrying out an EIA is to meet legislative requirements. So we have to, if it's a certain project or a project of a certain size, or it's determined that it could have a significant impact on the environment, an EIA will be required. But lots of developers now are doing kind of, should we say, informal EIAs called environmental reports to show that they are kind of supporting sustainable development and that their projects are not going to have an overall detrimental effect on the environment. So how are these carried out? Again, apologies for those who know this, but I'll run through it relatively quickly. So the first step is, once you've got your project identified, you would identify any potential receptors. So in the marine environment, this could be fish, marine mammals, birds, and of course, humans. We'll then identify any potential impacts that could affect those receptors. So taking a marine example, if you wanted to remove sediment from the seabed, you would do something called dredging, which is where you take basically a big hoover along the seabed. And as you are doing that, you are agitating the sediment around that hoover as well, which then goes up into the water column and creates a bit of a plume. So the impact there would be increased suspended sediment or more sediment in the water column. Then what we need to look at is if there's a pathway between the impact and the receptor. So taking the impact we've just said, which is increased sediment within the water column, that could impact fish by kind of clogging up their gills or kind of making it hard for kind of finding prey species. So that would be taken along to assess further. Whereas you could have something like, the height of a blade on a wind turbine. There's no pathway for that to affect a fish. So that one wouldn't be considered any further. And once you've got these pathways identified between impacts and receptors, you would then assess the significance of those impacts. Now, each topic will have specific criteria and terminology that they use. But again, generally speaking, what you're looking at is the value or the sensitivity of the receptor and kind of how big the impact is, so called the magnitude. And you would look at these two things. Sometimes there might be other criteria coming in as well, like recoverability. And you would say, well, if it's highly sensitive and there's going to be a big impact, it's going to come out as a really big significance or major significance. And likewise, you would have a whole combination of these things that could come out from negligible all the way up to major. And what the developer will also do is, and where consultants kind of come in to advise, is if the impacts look like they are going to be intolerable, so the decision maker will say, actually, that's too much of an impact, we can advise on mitigation measures. So these are measures to kind of reduce the significance, generally around kind of the magnitude, so kind of how big an impact is. And again, if we take the previous example of increased suspended sediment, so sediment in the water column, shellfish beds are quite sensitive to kind of those types of plumes. So a mitigation measure might be to only dredge on certain states of the tide, so the sediment actually gets taken away from the shellfish bed as opposed to taken to the shellfish bed. And then what we do afterwards is once we've got those mitigation measures, we will do another assessment to say, well, with that mitigation measure in place, what's the impact now? So, I mean, again, if you want to take it down to the bare bones, the EIA is kind of like an audit process of those decisions as well to show how decisions have been made. So that's what an EIA is. So my route kind of stumbled into it a little bit. So I've always been kind of fascinated by the marine environment, always loved kind of being in water, kind of being in kind of particularly the sea and kind of the animals and kind of everything that goes into kind of the management and maintenance of the marine environment. Obviously, these are the pictures we have in our mind when we're younger about what a marine scientist does. This is what actually, and that's not even to do with my job, that's just me on a weekend. This is kind of UK waters, so quite turbid, but didn't dull my kind of interest or passion. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no idea what careers there were really for marine scientists. So I went to university and I did my bachelor's degree in aquatic zoology. Now, don't be fooled by the name. I didn't do much zoology. I kind of tailored my degree more towards kind of legislation, policy, and kind of whole ecosystem kind of environmental management and management of kind of whole areas. And that's what I really enjoyed. But again, after university, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. So what I did was I found organisations, predominantly consultancies, that offered graduate type roles once you kind of left university that had a marine element to them. So I applied to others, but these were kind of the four main ones. So ABPMER, Royal Haskonian, and URS Scott Wilson were all consultancies. And then there was Associated British Ports, which, as the name suggests, was kind of a port group. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't successful in any of the graduate schemes, but Associated British Ports, based on my kind of final year dissertation, offered me a job. So they said I could be a projects assistant and I could support getting an application through for a port development because that's what my dissertation was. It was hypothetical impacts of a port development at the Port of Hull. So my job was to take the docks at the top left down to the docks on the bottom left. So slightly different aspect, but basically what's happened is the left-hand side of the dock has been infilled. There's a structure kind of in the estuary, so that kind of got taken down and a new quay was built. So I helped kind of get all the assessments and everything ready. Unfortunately, I left before it got permission, but I was working with the consultants at this point to actually define the project, um, review the kind of assessments they were doing, and kind of question kind of the evidence and things that were going to make sure that, it was robust. Whilst I was at Associated British Ports, I also did my master's dissertation as well. So this was looking at so the dredge material, so the hoovering of the seabed. Once you've hooved it, the sediment has to go somewhere. So I was looking at where this material could go within the Humber estuary. Now, when I started at ABP, I was pretty sure I wanted to be a consultant. So that's where we started. But over the kind of the 18 months, I realized actually I kind of want to be on the other side of it. I want to kind of work with regulators and public bodies. So I started to apply for those roles. So I applied for lots of them, but they were very targeted roles in kind of the civil service, public service, and non-government organisations. And I was quite lucky to be offered a role at the Centre for Environment, Fisheries and Aquaculture Science. And I will go on now to give you a little bit of background about that. So I was at CFAS for just over 11 years. Whilst I was there, I was able to kind of progress. So not only did I have my science and kind of technical aspect, I also was a team leader and then was a group manager. So I looked after 3 teams of scientists, which is about 35 people. And apart from the people management side, my day-to-day job was to provide advice on the potential impacts of activities on the marine environment. And this advice could go to the regulators, so that's the people kind of deciding whether to give consent for these projects, or it could be to government around kind of what happens if there was a policy change, or even to international bodies as well. So that was kind of my kind of day to day. I then also did other things. So I carried out and I kind of led research and development projects. They were very applied kind of projects. So it was looking at kind of what goes on and what could we do to kind of make it easier or kind of better evidence, more robust kind of assessments going forward. And part of that role, I was also kind of the UK delegate for an international convention. So I got to go to the international meetings. I got to work on working groups and provide kind of guidance and things. And I also got to chair a couple of those working groups. And whilst I was at CFAS, whilst I worked across a whole host of industries, I focused my kind of specialism on specifically kind of dredge and disposal operations, so that removal of seabed sediment and where to put it, and particularly kind of ports and kind of port expansions. And what I really liked about the CFAS role was that I was predominantly in science, but I was able to influence policy and I was able to get really close to legislation and understand kind of the nuances of specific piece of legislation that were relevant. And I also got really kind of cool opportunities. So not only was I kind of pride and advice and doing these R&D projects, but I also got to do kind of quite hands-on projects as well. So I got to work internationally with other kind of government agencies about supporting them about how to review things or how to license things, what were the things to look at. And an example of kind of an applied R&D project was I was part of a team that developed kind of a standardized risk assessment for assessing pollution from wrecks, which was really useful, which was really good. And that was kind of for internationally as well. And after 11 years at CFAS, really enjoyed the role, really enjoyed the organisation, but kind of wanted a different challenge because I didn't really want to move technical areas, but kind of wanted to keep challenging myself. So I left CFAS and I went to go work for RPS. So RPS is quite a large consultancy. They're now part of the Tetra Tech company. And this was slightly different. So whereas in CFAS I was working on lots of different projects, lots of different industries, I was doing kind of very local up to international work. At RPS, it was focused on offshore renewables. So I had one major offshore wind project. And that's mainly because the projects are quite big. They require a lot of kind of coordination, quite in depth. There's lots of moving parts. And I had a project management role. So it was much more kind of project management than it was technical input. So I do lots of budget management, lots of subcontractor management. There was lots of kind of document reviews, document and data management, customer liaison, lots of communication, and kind of keeping it all together. Again, really enjoyable, really good company, but I did struggle a little bit because ports are my passion, the dredging disposal, and also the variety of work as well. So I started thinking about what was the things that I really enjoyed. So what I really enjoyed was providing impartial advice on proposed developments, whether that's to developers or to the regulators or to government, was kind of a moot point for me. What I liked was bringing the evidence together and going, this is what the evidence suggests, and this is my opinion based on my expertise. And also kind of not just on proposed developments, but also any kind of changes to policy and legislative consultations that, being able to review those and kind of input into them and maybe affect change is what I like. I've put all through managing and reviewing environmental impact assessment reports. Any aspect of the EIA I quite like doing, but I quite like doing a mix of it. And I've said EIA, but actually, any kind of environmental assessment reports I get involved in. I quite like writing proposals, so I like getting kind of tender questions through, going, we want someone to do this, how would you do it? And really thinking it through, and having a bit of, brainstorming sessions with others. I quite like that. And also, I've never lost that people management side. I quite like mentoring. And so when I was thinking about what other roles I wanted beyond RPS, I applied to Haskoning. So here I am now. I've been here for over a year. And my day-to-day in Haskoning is it's probably a mix of the kind of the CFAS and the RPS roles, but the things that I like from them, which is always nice. So day to day, I am a desk-based colleague, so I don't do field surveys. So when I say it's kind of different day to day, what I'm talking about is kind of the tasks I get asked to do. I'm not out in the field, but again, that's because that's what I prefer. It works well with my family life and kind of what I want to do. So I'm very happy, and I know other people would hate to be at a desk every day and go out to the field, and that's fine. That's why we have all these different roles. So it is different. So some days it can be very meeting heavy. Sometimes it can be, lots of different requests coming in and urgent requests. And sometimes it's just a day of focus, kind of working on one or two things. I still have a project manager role, but I still have my technical role as well. So I get to be a kind of like an involved project manager where I get to, work with customers, work with subcontractors, work with the specialists, kind of manage them, manage budgets, manage program. But I also get to kind of do some of the writing as well, which is something I really like. So I get to kind of review data. And again, because we've got a large team, I can bring people in to do the things that either I don't enjoy as much or the things that I'm weaker at, and I get to do the things that, I'm really good at, or I can bring other people in and support their training and development as well with it. Upsides of kind of not just working in Haskoning, but kind of any consultancy, I think, is definitely the variety of projects. So whilst I'm much more focused on the area that I'm interested in, I still have a variety of projects, even ports. I've got some projects that are looking at redevelopment. I've got some ports that are wanting to do kind of a new building. I've got others that want to do a really big dredge, so removing the sediment from the seabed. So even though they're ports specific, I've got lots of different things going on. So that's good. And because of that, I'm learning new areas as well. So as I say, I come from a marine background, but now that I'm working on kind of like coastal defences as well, I'm also learning the terrestrial application and planning process, which is relatively new. I'd obviously knew about it, but not in the detail that I do now. Still get to do lots of multidisciplinary work, especially when it comes to EIAs. You've got lots of specialists that you can bring together and kind of have those multidisciplinary conversations and understand how something from one topic can impact someone else. I still get to attend conferences and working groups. So actually, I'm part of a few IES working groups, and I'm at a conference this week. So that's quite good. And again, it's kind of fitting in with my work. It's going to those ones that kind of are of interest and also support Haskoning. There's lots of problem solving. So a bit like the writing proposals, sometimes you get a request in that's completely left field. So being able to kind of sit down with others and just kind of work it through and have a bit of back and forth. Um, Again, I've talked about, in my role, I do project management, admin, and specialism and specialist type work, which is what I like. I like being able to, if I'm in the zone, I can do some specialist work, but actually, if I'm not, I just need an hour, I can do some admin. And there's autonomy. So I've got quite a few projects, but as long as I know what I'm doing it to scope. I can kind of get left to kind of do it on my own. And my seniors are there to support if and when I need it, which is always important. Now, obviously, there's challenges in every job. One of the biggest ones for me moving from a public sector or a civil service organization like CFAS and going into consultancy is the financial target side. So CFAS was obviously, it had some kind of external funding, but it was also funded by the government. Coming into consultancy and having kind of all your time, or majority of your time is fee earning is quite difficult, and like having that pressure to work on proposals, win proposals. It was something I really struggled with when I first went into consultancy. But again, it's not as scary as what it first seems because you've got a whole team behind you and you do have kind of, like you say, your seniors are there to support as well. It's not all on kind of one or two people. Um, there is a feast and famine kind of workloads. So again, working previously in a civil service that was funded by government, there was always really something to do, something to support on. Whereas now it is all fee earning work. So if projects are full, they don't need anyone else, and actually there's no more projects on the books. It can be quite stressful to go, actually, what do I work on? I must admit, quite rare that happens. Most of the time, it's kind of manageable workload. And again, there will be things that the company needs. So again, it's all about that communication and letting people know if you've got time to support. Budget management. Must admit, if I'm working on something on my own and it's just me and like one or two other people, budget management's not too bad. It's when you get kind of 25 people all booking, if all of those people kind of overbook by an hour, it soon adds up. So that's something that is a bit of a challenge. Obviously, we've got regulatory complexity. If you just look at the terrestrial, if you just look at the marine, it's quite complex. And then if you work across the two, it becomes even more complex. So making sure you've hit not only kind of the sustainability side of things that the developer wants and kind of the ethos and making sure that, morally everything is right, making sure you've ticked all the boxes that the regulator wants is quite a lot of pressure if you're relatively new. So just that complexity. Sometimes you can be seen as a bit of a middleman, where kind of the developer asks you a question, you go to the specialist comes back and you send it back to the developer. But actually, that is quite an important role because sometimes what you need to do is you need to kind of rephrase what the developer wants so the specialist understands. And then sometimes when the specialist sends it back, it might not be what the developer's asked for, or it might be kind of too jargon heavy. So you might need to kind of rephrase it so it's kind of understandable. So it is still an important role. Building relationships. So on the day to day, we've said you have customer liaison. It's great, once you've got those relationships, but sometimes it's quite hard to build those relationships, especially for the introverted people. But it comes with time. But it's just one of the things that I certainly notice. If I go to conferences and stuff, it's quite hard to kind of just go up and talk to people. Some people find it easy. It's something that I find quite difficult. So something that I work on. And also a big one for me is in consultancy is perception. So there's this perception that because you are working, you're getting your salary effectively paid by a developer, that you are going to write an EIA to allow the development to go ahead. That's not what happens. The developer is paying a consultancy for their professional advice and expertise. So they are providing, they're paying for our specialist and impartial advice. I don't know anyone or any consultancy that would kind of bend the will of a developer and say, oh, something's a major significance, but actually we're just going to kind of reword it and it'll come out as minor. What would happen is the consultancy would go, no, that's not what we're doing. That's not what you paid us for. So there's that perception, which is getting better, I must admit, but there is still that perception there that we're working hard on. So in terms of kind of skills and tools that I use in my day to day, Some of these will be quite obvious. So obviously there's the project management skills, like I said, budget management, people management, program management, making sure things are delivered to scope, budget, program, those types of things. Microsoft Office, it seems like a quite basic one, but actually some of the even Word, some of the stuff that we do in university is like really basic, and then it can do some weird and wonderful things. Obviously, regulations. So I've developed my kind of technical skills around regulations, what they mean when they apply, especially in the marine. And now I'm kind of learning for terrestrial. Again, application processes. I understand the marine licensing process. I'm learning the terrestrial. I've got developed my EIA technical skills, so understanding the overall process, kind of what it means when certain things are done in certain stages. And then obviously my specific knowledge around kind of sediment quality with relation to kind of dredge and disposal. And I have some ecological knowledge from kind of working with multidisciplinary across multidisciplinary teams and working on multidisciplinary reports. I know enough to kind of question things, but obviously we have a team, so if I could question it and then take it back to a specialist. Some of the tools that we use, so mapping data, so things like ArcGIS, Q, and then the online kind of mapping portals are really, really useful. Again, Microsoft Office. I don't use it as much, but programming is definitely something that is getting used more and more in consultancy, and the use of AI. And then also project management tools, which there are too many to kind of mention. There's lots of different ones. But yeah, there's some really good project management tools as well to kind of help with our projects. And then what I thought I'd bring in is some of the softer skills as well that are kind of needed. So I've mentioned communication already. That's kind of a key one for me. And then I've mentioned problem solving as well, whether that's kind of going away on your own or kind of working with a team. The one that I struggle with and still working on is negotiation. I do not have a poker face at all. Just if any of my clients are out, you'll know you know now I don't have a poker face. So that is one where again I know it's not one of my strengths, so we put things into place so that there's support there if we do need to. Again, some of the softer side of project management around kind of people management, really important. Collaboration. So I said, there are a couple of projects where it might be like just me or me and one other person, but actually most of these involves lots of different people, even if they're not part of the core project team, and being able to work across them all and communicate between each other is really, really important. And then adaptability and flexibility I've kind of put in there because sometimes you might get asked to do something that's a different topic, but actually it uses the same transferable skills. Sometimes you might have to drop something that you've been, you've had planned in for weeks, but then something urgent comes in. So being adaptable and kind of flexible to those requests are also important. Some of the people I work with. So I've mentioned some of these already, but I thought I'd go through specifically. So obviously I work with kind of regulatory bodies. So we tend to kind of communicate with them to ensure that the projects comply and all the assessments comply with the environmental regulations and promote sustainable management. So these could be kind of Marine Management Organisation in England, Environment Agency, Natural England for kind of conservation aspects, and also local authorities. Obviously, we collaborate with developers. So we work with them to kind of include any ecological safeguards, meet environmental regulations, and as I mentioned, if impacts are looking like they're being too significant, too detrimental, we'll work with them to think about mitigation measures that not only work for the environment, but are kind of environmentally and kind of technologically feasible for them. Sometimes we'll kind of collaborate with non-government organisations to share expertise, data, and support marine conservation initiatives. This is really good for kind of lessons learned and understanding what other people are doing and kind of what didn't work for them, so we can bring the kind of the lessons along. Some of the larger projects we engage with local communities. So this is all about kind of working with the public who might be impacted by or having an interest in a development, and getting their input and fostering trust with them. Sometimes they can come up with things that we haven't considered or identify receptors that we hadn't thought about because they know the local area really well. So that's always kind of a good step to take. And then again, I keep coming back to it, the effective stakeholder communication. So we will work with other consultancies or the developer to kind of help draft clear communication. So this could be doing webinars like this, it could be kind of doing public consultations, it could be writing kind of leaflets or updates, newsletters, things like that, to kind of help explain kind of the project and specifically kind of what our role is in it. So from my perspective, it would be kind of what are the environmental aspects. So we've talked a little bit about project. I'm not going to go into kind of specifics, like specific projects today, but I thought I'd do is just give a few examples of some of the projects that I work on and kind of their link to sustainability. So a relatively easy one is offshore wind. So obviously they are supporting kind of net zero, but consultants obviously want to make sure they're not having a significantly detrimental effect on the marine environment and kind of the ecosystems that kind of go there. So that's why they have environmental impact assessments done. You've got ports that support trade, connectivity, support kind of local and national economies. But again, very similar to the wind farms, we want to make sure that they are developed in such a way that don't impact the environment negatively. And then you've got dredging disposals. So when we're working with developers about dredges, we're looking at is that the best location for kind of a dredge channel to be or a berth? What's going to happen? How quickly will it infill? Is that the are there any mitigation measures we need to put in place? And it could be for things like increasing imports, but it could also be for kind of like passenger ferries as well. An important point for dredging for the dredging is that we look at alternative uses for the sediment. So the sediment sometimes can be used to create or sustain kind of intertidal habitats and create kind of like salt marsh habitats. And then the bottom right one is kind of coastal defence, coastal resilience. So these projects are to kind of, don't want to say combat, kind of mitigate the effects of climate change. So they're looking to protect the coastline, like buildings, humans, ecosystems. And because these tend to border kind of the marine and the terrestrial element as well, they tend to have a biodiversity net gain requirement associated with them. So the need to kind of leave the environment in a better state than prior to the project. Oops, pressing too quick. So my advice for aspiring EIA practitioners is the soft skills are actually really, really important. Please don't kind of put those to one side and spend all of your time on kind of the technical side. The technical is really important, but actually the soft skills of those kind of communication, problem solving, emotional intelligence, project management, those types of things are really important. If you can't communicate with each other, then your projects aren't going to get very far. The project management skills, so the budgets, time management, even if you're not a project manager, even if, you want to be purely specialist, you have to understand how much time you've got and how to budget your time to make sure you deliver the scope. And likewise, if you get given a deadline, how you can manage your time to make sure you get everything done that needs to be done. Remember that technical skills can be transferable, but the technical knowledge helps to specialize. So like EIA, from my perspective, I can understand kind of the process of it, but I wouldn't be able to write a fish chapter because my technical knowledge is somewhere else. But I can review a fish chapter to say, actually, yes, this follows it, or actually there's something missing here and it jumps. So yeah, just understanding the difference between those and also professional memberships. So I mentioned I'm a member of IES and actually they're really, really useful for kind of giving updates and kind of having a network of people to kind of rely to kind of go to support you. And if you're looking for kind of advancement or kind of accreditations, Then IES also have a kind of a mentorship program as well. And again, those mentorship programs, whether it's through IES or through your role or other ways, can also be really helpful for identifying kind of how you can progress and develop. And then kind of my final take home. So this is something that a previous chief scientist of DEFRA gave. And his advice was around how scientific advisors should behave. But I actually think this is just be how anyone who's providing advice, any scientist, should kind of, and they said behave, but I still think it's really important. And this is hopefully you've got some of this from my earlier slides as well. So he says, be brief, concise, jargon-free, unbiased, and apolitical. There will always be some bias. We can't get away from that, but acknowledging it and kind of explaining where that bias is really important, because then it allows others to kind of make an informed opinion as well. If you're going to give advice, make sure you have the evidence to support it. Even if that might be from experience, make sure you specify kind of how you've informed your advice. Beware of the audience. So again, today I don't know who the audience is, so I've made it quite broad spectrum. I've had to do some kind of more introductory slides just to make sure that we get everyone up to the same speed. But if I had a really specialist audience, I probably would have used more specialist or kind of jargon terms. If you're communicating, have confidence. It sounds really obvious, but if you're really nervous in a meeting, or if you're kind of if you haven't got the confidence, sometimes you might not be heard, which seems really unfair. And again, having your team leaders or your senior managers, if you have chats with them, they can help you kind of build that confidence and make sure you're heard in meetings. Keep things in perspective. So, you're not going to solve all the problems with one environmental impact assessment, but you also don't want the environmental impact assessment to be a tick box exercise. So it's about understanding where the work you're doing now, where that fits in. And also, you may not receive support from scientific community. This one seems a little bit odd to put in, but if I just bring a personal kind of example into this one, it doesn't have to be huge, like trying to prove a theorem about the universe. So my mentor, who I have at CFAS, who I still talk to on a daily basis, she's, we both our specialisms are dredge and disposal, kind of, the dredge and disposal topic and kind of sediment quality. And I will have an opinion about a specific application or case, and she might have a different opinion. And it's because we're coming at it from the different perspectives. So again, we've each got our bias in it. So it's about whether or not, if I want to go with my advice, whether I have the evidence to support it. I can bring in the evidence that my colleague has, but I can say, actually, I think this evidence overruns it, or this is why I think actually this is the advice you should take. Again, I'd have to be confident in my communication in doing that. And I'd have to make sure that there's, things to back it up. So yeah, and the last one that isn't on the slide, but I kind of thought about this morning whilst driving, was a really important thing for scientists to be able to do is say, I don't know. We don't know everything. And it's really hard when you're put on the spot and you're asked a question just to try and worm your way through, kind of actually just going, I don't know, I'll get back to you, is still a valid response. And people do kind of respect that response. So you'll be very happy to hear that is the last of my slides. So obviously happy to take any questions. I will hand over to Amy in just a second, but I'm just leaving this up for a few seconds so people can get my email if they want it. But it is being recorded, so it will be shared afterwards, so you can get those. So Amy, thank you.
Thanks, Gemma. That was great. Really good insight into your work. We've already had quite a few questions come in, so I'll get going with those straight away, see how many we can get through. Someone's asked, kind of around coming from a marine background into terrestrial-based EIA work. How challenging was that, and how transferable did you find your skills? And then I'll leave it there for a second. They've asked a bit of a follow-up, but we'll just go one at a time for now.
Yeah, I will forget if you ask too many questions in a row. Yeah, it was definitely like anxiety inducing going because I knew exactly what needed to do for a marine license, whereas a planning, actually, depending on the type of development and the size of it, there's different things you need to put in. So it was very, very difficult to kind of do that. But actually, it's again, I sat down with someone who's actually worked through it and said, look, how do you determine kind of what's needed? And he talked me through kind of the national and the local validation list. He was like, look, this is what you need to go through. And he gave me some really good advice about actually how to justify anything that we've done, or rather justify anything we've not submitted. So we have a little document that sits alongside the planning application that says basically all the documents you could need in a planning application. And I literally had a sentence going, this has been included, here's the reference, or this hasn't been included because. So that's now a kind of standard practice for me. So that was definitely that's what I was most scared of, is missing something out. And then in terms of actually doing the documents, actually the transferable skills came in. So it was very much a take a step back. What's the aim of the document? What's the scope of it? And kind of, looking online and going, give me some examples and kind of what is it? What are the kind of steps, like in an EIA, do I have to include? And kind of working through it that way. So kind of quite methodical. So the specifics obviously was a bit different, but actually just being able to take it through one step at a time was probably the advice I'd give.
Great, thank you. And then the follow-up to that was whether there's any advice that you'd give to someone coming from a regulatory background who's interested into moving more into the consultancy side of things.
I would say don't be scared of it. I was absolutely petrified because I knew about obviously civil service, I'd been in there. There are perks to being in civil service, but actually consultancy is not that scary. Um, and I must admit, I didn't make the move from civil service to consultancy until my friend did, and they could give me a honest like feedback. But I mean, like at RPS and at Haskell, so they're the two consultancies I've worked at. The thing that I valued the most was my work-life balance and kind of flexibility. So if I need to leave for an appointment, I can leave for an appointment and I'll work over the next day. So as long as I get my 37 and a half hours in a week, then that's the main thing. There's still leave. And again, it's all the other things that came with it as well. So like the variety of projects. But yeah, I would definitely say don't be scared of it, but just make sure that you know what you want out of that move.
Lovely, thank you. And then kind of going back to earlier in your career, I guess, we have quite a few questions from students and recent graduates actually who are interested in going into this sort of field. And there's quite a few different ones, so hopefully I can do a bit of a catch-all. But what kind of advice would you give for someone who's at that very early stage in their career in terms of maybe finding placements or graduate schemes or those, yeah, more entry-level jobs? What should they be looking out for?
Yeah, I would say probably the first one is definitely keep doing things like this. The thing that like I say in my presentation, I had no idea what jobs were out there for kind of like a marine person. I viewed them as either like engineering, which I did not want to do, or like don't want to sound horrible or anything, but like training dolphins. I had no idea what was in between. So things like this really help, and there are now becoming more and more kind of guides on kind of marine careers. So definitely these things I say help. And in terms of placements and stuff, I think the thing that I didn't do, which I'm now realizing you can do, is actually just reach out to people and ask. And even if you don't get a placement, just having like I've done it before where I've just had hour chats with people where we've gone through something specific, if they've wanted to. That works. So, get on LinkedIn, find people who are doing the things that you want to do, and just message them. Like they do exactly the same. The worst thing they'll do is say no or ignore you, but like move on. Sometimes they're busy. It's nothing personal. But yeah, reach out that way. And you'll find actually you'll probably get even if not more opportunities, you've got more exposure to kind of what it's like in the real world.
Great, that's really helpful, thank you. And I hope that answered most parts of what all those different questions were asking. Um, we're kind of coming to the end of the time now, so I will just ask one more wrap-up question. I was just kind of thinking, obviously, with this presentation, and in terms of the other stuff that you've been able to get involved with at the IES, so working groups, and then you're also part of our Marine and Coastal Science Steering Group. I just wondered if you had any reflections on those sort of extracurricular things that you can do in terms of your professional development. Obviously, you mentioned that they've been things that are relevant to your job and benefit you in that way, but how has that impacted you as well, being able to do those extra things?
Yeah, they've definitely impacted. It kind of gets you out of the tunnel vision, I think. So it's very easy for me to just go dredge, 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 and kind of seabed quality and forget everything else. And then when, yeah, you take a step back, there are other things going on where you go, actually, that's relevant. So, like for instance, because climate change isn't something I really get involved in unless it's part of an EIA, kind of those assessments. It's something that kind of passes me by, but then you go to these meetings, you go, actually, there's these changes happening. And some of them are applicable to EIA, so kind of like the different tiers of like emissions that now have to be assessed. And you go, oh yeah, and actually, it might not have been something that I thought about for a dredge and disposal operation, but because they are using vessels to go out and hoover the seabed, actually, I'm having more and more conversations with the change team now. So it's helped me technically because I'm getting more involved in them. It's helped my network because I'm getting more involved with those kind of conversations, not just internally, but externally. And it's also giving me that wider perspective.
That's great to hear. So yeah, as I said, I think we'll have to leave it there. Hopefully anyone who had any more questions was able to catch Gemma's email address up on that slide, but obviously this has been recorded as well, so it'll be up on our website and our YouTube channel if you wanted to catch up on anything, or yeah, be able to get in touch with Gemma. So thank you, Gemma, for presenting. That was, as I said, a really great insight into your role and kind of how you've got where you are in your career. I hope everyone found it beneficial and informative. If you're a member of the IES and have come along to this webinar, make sure you record your attendance in the CPD tool, which you can do by logging into the members area. If you're watching this as a recording, please do subscribe to the channel, like the video, and if you click on the bell icon, you'll be notified when we post any new content. Thank you again to Gemma, and thanks to everyone for coming along and being so engaged, and have a lovely rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.